especially on those cold, dark, and stormy nights. It lays in ruin, run down, and overgrown. But to all of us ghosts, it's our haunted sweet home. Welcome to our haunted house. Step right in, don't loiter about. The ghosts are dying to give you a tour down everything in dark corridor. The shadows whisper and the floorboards creak.
And every cobweb's hung with care.
We've done our best to keep it cold and bleak, so you'll be primed for every scare. Welcome to our haunted house. Around each bed, something waits to pop out. 1,000 horrors are lurking within to frighten you right out of your skin. A phantom's hiding beneath that old bedspread.
A severed hand creeps across the floor.
Our basement's loaded with the living dead, and we've got specters by the score. Welcome to our haunted house. Ghosts can be real, but now you're having your doubts. Just spend the night here, we'll prove it to you. By making all your nightmares come true. It's bound to scare you when you see our ghostly review. We double dare you. Don't be daunted, brave our haunted house.
Welcome to Midsummer Scream. Their names are iconic. Their characters are the pillars of the horror genre. Now it's time to meet their families as they discuss growing up as the original Monster Kids. Please welcome to the stage, daughter of Boris Karloff, Sara Karloff. Granddaughter of Bela Lugosi, Lynne Lugosi Sparks. Grandson and great-grandson of Lon Chaney Jr. and Sr., Ron Chaney. And your host, renowned horror memorabilia collector, lifelong monster kid, and the lead guitarist for Metallica, Kirk Hammett.
All right. Hello, everyone. Happy Saturday. It's Saturday, right? And hello, everyone here. How are you guys doing today?
We're doing great.
Excellent.
Great to be here at Midsummer Scream, and thank you all for attending. And Kirk, thank you so much
Yeah.
for being here.
How are you, Sarah, today?
I'm just fine and delighted to see you. I'd like to
Likewise.
tell the audience that the man moderating not today is not what he sings on stage. He is the nicest, most lovely, articulate, soft-spoken friend in the world. He is just a lovely human being. Just go away. He is the antithesis of what he is up on stage. Just like my father was the antithesis of the roles he played. Kirk is, I had a little problem last year. Kirk sent me the most gigantic, gorgeous orchid you ever saw in your life. It was almost as tall as this building. It was superb. It was lovely. And he's just thoughtful, generous, kind, soft-spoken, and articulate. And he does no gyrations as a friend. He just is lovely. So I hope I've embarrassed you.
You've done a good job, Sarah. And thank you. That was so nice. Thank you for the sweet words. And yeah, it's great to have you. And as well, Lynn, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Excellent,
It's
excellent.
really great to be here and see everybody out and about after a couple years.
Yes, it's been a crazy couple of years. And so I'm just glad that we're all here together now. We can all experience this together and forget about those last crazy years that we've had. And so yeah, let's move on to the proceedings, yeah? Festivities. Okay. Okay, so am I supposed to like ask questions first, or is the video supposed to run first?
Read the paper in your hand.
What was that? Oh yeah, the clicker. Oh yeah, I got a clicker. Okay, that's what's good. All right, there we go. Sorry guys. Where's my guitar? All right, so here we have we have pictures of your aforementioned fathers, grandfathers, and whatnot. And I'd like to at least just start off this whole thing with, my one big question that I've been meaning to ask you guys for years and years and years is, how did you guys all meet and when did you meet?
Sarah has great stories.
We all met at, what was it, 90s? What was the show?
I think it was 93.
93.
I think.
We were all invited to a 4-8 Ackersman Famous Monsters convention when they picked that book back up.
Yes, Forrest J. Ackerman.
Yep.
Rest in peace.
He invited us all out, and I think we were all very curious as to, I wonder what they're like. I wonder what they think about that. And so the first time we met was at that show. And I think we were all mutually interested in what the other ones did.
Absolutely.
And we hit it off so wonderful. We had a great time. And it really awoke all of us to how amazing all of you fans really are for the horror genre and the respect you show for our families. It really means a lot to us. You have no idea.
We'd all be home cleaning our own ovens.
That's really great. I mean, for me, it's like I said, it's a real honor to meet you guys and know you guys through the years, and for me, it's a real connection to everything that your family has represented. Your families have represented in terms of like the horror genre and the whole world in general. So Ron, can you tell us what's going on now these days with the Lon Chaney Sr., Lon Chaney Jr. legacy?
Well, I do have a lot of different things. I think I inherited that creative streak from my ancestors, and I've been working on finishing a book that my grandfather started. It was called A Century of Cheneys. I hope to publish next year. I'm really close. It's turned into 2 volumes, so there'll be a second one. So the first one is really about Lon Sr., my great-grandmother Cleva, who was also a singer on stage, and my grandfather traveling, barnstorming around America in 1903 to 1913, where they ended up in LA. So it kind of covers his whole lifespan. I go back into the deafness in our family. I call that chapter The Foundation. And then I move forward, and then book 2 will be really, it hands off. My last chapter will be Fade Out, when Lon Sr. passes away, and then book 2 will be Fade In, where my grandfather makes that decision to go into the business and follow his father's footsteps. So I've been working on that a long time. People go, hey, you used to have brown hair when you started that thing. So that one's been, but it's close. And then just recently, we premiered a stage play, a musical, back in Michigan. It was called 1,000 Faces, the Lon Chaney musical. It was really well received. We're really excited about the potential where it could go. It has to deal a lot with, family dynamics, but also we touch in, like Act 1 is pretty much his young life, and then his stage life. Because people don't know he was on stage for 11 years. And then the second Act 2 is all about his movie career and the influence he had on so many people and generations. So yeah, that, and I've been working on some scripts that I've had recently. A publisher of monster graphic novels are very interested in the scripts that I wrote. One's a Western horror. One's meant to be a sequel to The Wolfman called Curse of the Wolfman. And then I rewrote London After Midnight. So I hope to do those someday.
That's something. A rewrite of London After Midnight. I mean, if anyone has like any permission to do that, I would think it would be you. For sure.
I hope so.
Yeah. Let's cycle through some of these pictures now. All right, here we go. We have your father in that miraculous makeup as the Phantom, and then so Lynn, can you tell us anything about? I mean, your grandfather. I mean, I know that that there's been a generational sort of like space in between your grandfather and yourself. But can you tell us any anecdotes or anything like that? Any sort of like family history that we haven't heard yet?
Well, my grandfather was 56 years old when my dad was born. So there is that generational gap there. But I really grew up just knowing that my grandfather was an actor. We had pictures all over our house of him in his different roles. But it really wasn't until maybe like early high school that people would recognize my name, and they would even teachers would say, "Can I bite your neck?" Totally inappropriate now. But I would just say, as I grew up, I started realizing the impact that my grandfather still has on people today. But really, I think for me, my dad brought a suit against Universal early in his actually he was still in law school, against Universal when they were using my grandfather's name and likeness on merchandise. And that started this whole business of protecting the name and likeness, because
deservedly so. Absolutely. That legacy belongs to you guys and really no one else in my belief.
Yeah, that was really an important thing he did, and my dad, and for his father, and he has carried on that responsibility of protecting the legacy and extending the legacy, and I'm proud to take over that mantle now. My dad says hi, by the way. He wishes he could have been here in person. But yeah, it's an honor.
Yeah, I've never run into anyone who's ever had a last name like Lugosi. So, I mean, that is a pretty unique last name.
Yeah, and my dad being Bela Lugosi Jr., even to this day, almost a day doesn't go by when somebody recognizes the name, or you're on hold for something, and you say, "What's your name?" And they're like, "Oh, like the actor," or "Oh, Dracula," like the kid, like that couldn't possibly be the right name.
But I mean, pretty much could be said about Karloff too. I mean, that's such a unique last name as well. I've never run into anyone named Joe Karloff or anything like that. That's one of a kind. But that was actually created by your father, right? That name, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, Bela Lugosi?
Well, no, it's Karloff. The Karloff name was maybe created by Boris.
Well, my father's real name was William Henry Pratt.
Yeah. It's not quite the same
so
person.
scary,
Yeah.
not so scary.
Not the same.
Doesn't have the same ring.
Yeah.
And whenever he was asked where his Boris Karloff came from, he always said that Karloff came from way back on his mother's side of the family. Now you have to understand that there's probably been 8 or 10 biographies written on him, and nobody's found that. Searching back. And he always said that Boris came from thin air. I'll go with his story. I can't beat it. I don't know where it came from.
Yep.
But that's what he always said when he was being interviewed. So who knows where it came from. There are speculations that Karloff came from a play or a book or something, but he stuck to that story and so on.
Okay.
When we all met each other in the very beginning, you know, we all went to dinner, and it was kind of, we got a few eyebrows raised when they said, "Party for Chaney, Karloff, and Lugosi?"
Yeah. Wow.
You know, Bela Lugosi's name wasn't his birth name either. Yeah,
Really?
he was born Bela Blasko.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
and he was born in a town called Lugos, Hungary, which is now in Romania. But so he took that as his stage name early on in Hungary,
That, wow. That's cool.
Yeah.
That-
and it stuck.
Yeah, you know, like I said, Lugosi is such a unique name, you know, and it just really fits your father's persona for sure.
Yeah.
It's-
Well, your grandfather had so much experience on the stage in Hungary before he ever came to this country. I mean, of all three of us, Lynne's grandfather had the most experience before he came to this country. My father, the first play he was ever in, his salary was $30 a week when the curtain went up, and it was $15 a week when the curtain came down, because it was very clear that he'd never stepped foot on the stage. As opposed to Lynne's grandfather, who was a very experienced stage actor before he ever got to this country.
Yeah.
Whereas my father had been a truck driver.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that he was 49 when he made Dracula. So he'd already had quite an extensive, successful stage career in Hungary before even coming here.
It was the right age for that role, you know, a
Yeah.
distinguished older gentleman
Yeah.
sort of like role, and so I think it was just perfect for him, for sure. Yeah. I have to go on record to say, you know, Bela Lugosi and Dracula are just synonymous. And you know, there's been other great actors who've played Dracula, Christopher Lee, you know, for one, you know, but Lugosi, Bela Lugosi and Dracula, those two characters are just like so tightly, you know, infused together. Yeah.
Yeah, over his life, I'm sure, he even said it was a blessing and a curse. But you know, even today, when we're, talking with people or maybe licensing for a product, everybody says Bela Lugosi is Dracula.
Yeah.
And he is Dracula.
Yeah.
You know,
One of the things that, you know, I just would want to have seen is I would have wanted to have seen Bela actually experiencing the great resurgence of the Universal monster craze in the 60s. I mean, I'm sure Bela would have been so just like pleased, as I'm sure your father was, Sarah. I mean, do you have anything to say about it during the 60s when all of a sudden monsters became huge again?
You know, my father was 44 when he made Frankenstein. It was his 81st film, and he said nobody saw the first 80. And he had done a lot of silence, a lot of series, an awful lot of hard work before Frankenstein came along, and it had been offered to Bela first. And for various reasons important to Bela, he turned it down. And then my father happened to be at the right place at the right time and was offered the role. And my father, of course, would have taken any role at that point in his career, so he accepted it. And of course, it was a turning point in my father's life, turning point in his career. And from there, he was offered all sorts of roles. And he went on to do, he made 167 films in all during his career. And of various types, not just monsters. He ended up starring on Broadway in 5 plays. He did a lot of television work. He had 3 television series of his own. And he did a huge amount of radio work. So that, but the kickoff was Frankenstein. And he was very, very fortunate to be offered that role. It took 4 hours to put the makeup on every day. And the camera does not lie. It had to be exactly the same every morning. And that speaks to the genius of Jack Pierce.
Yes, indeed.
He deserves it because. And my father had to be in the makeup chair by 3 o'clock in the morning and be ready to shoot whenever anybody else was ready. And then it took almost 3 hours after a full working day to take the makeup off. So his hours were long and grueling. He lost 25 pounds during the making of Frankenstein, and he was already a starving actor when he took the part. And he was not supposed to be, the creature was not supposed to be the star of the film. It was intended by the director, James Whale, who was a brilliant director, and not the first choice, thank you, not the first choice as a director. James Whale, Jack Pierce, it was a wonderful, wonderful, Colin Clive was intended to be the star of the film. And it turned out that my father, the creature, ended up being the star of the career. My father was not even invited to the premiere of the film.
Wow.
And he didn't see it for several weeks after its release. So it did make him, after 20 years in the business, it made him an overnight star. So he meant it when he said that the creature was his best friend. But he went on to do many, many, many more films. And the breadth of his career was what he was really grateful for. Although he was typecast, he was fortunate enough to do such a wide variety of films, not just horror creature films. And he was fortunate to continue to do a lot of radio, went on to just adopt the new medium of television. He moved back east to just embrace the new medium of television, which very few Hollywood stars did at the time. They, of course, at the beginning of television, it was live television. And many film stars were actually afraid of live television because they had become accustomed to take 1, take 2. And so my father was one of the first Hollywood stars to do live television. He had
Thriller, right? Thriller was one of them, and then another one was was it called An Evening with Boris Karloff? Something like that? Yeah. Were you ever on set for any of his television work?
I was on stage for some of his TV work and some of his film work. I am so glad you did not ask me if I'd been on stage for Frankenstein. Because as old as I may look up, I was not born.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
His iconic roles.
Yeah.
And most people ask me that. So
well, that's why I asked about the TV.
I love you even more for that.
I figured a safe question would be, the TV set. Question.
I never visited did those sets.
Okay.
We do have that fun
Great.
picture of my dad as a
Oh,
baby
yes.
standing between your dad's legs.
My legs, I know, on Son of Frankenstein.
Son of Frankenstein.
And for years, Bela had told me he was younger than I was until I saw that picture. I believed him.
My dad loves that story.
That's pretty funny. Okay, so I'm going to ask you guys a question that, it drives me quite crazy when people ask me, but, it's going to be my turn to ask. So I'm going to ask you guys,
Go ahead.
what's your favorite films of your fathers and grandfathers?
Mine?
Yeah,
I'll start.
favorite film.
It's a pretty easy one for me. Of course, Phantom of the Opera. I've done so much work on it. That was the horror film that started it all. And of course, my grandfather, it was The Wolfman. Can't be anything else, no doubt about it.
What about you, Lynn?
The other people have asked me that, and it's so hard to choose. I will pick a few, but my grandfather made 113 films and shorts over his career, which is amazing. He only played a vampire 4 times and Dracula twice on stage.
Wow.
I mean, on film. But I have to say that I love White Zombie. I know you
White Zombie's a good one.
yeah, I think my grandfather it was a pretty low budget, and he got to direct some of the scenes, and that was something he was very proud of and enjoyed doing on that film. But just his character in that is so great. And just, we talk about Dracula a lot, but really that was the first zombie movie. So that's a fun connection. And then of course Black Cat was such a wonderful
One of my
film,
favorites.
so unique, and just both, your dad and my grandfather, their characters were amazing, and such a film that ahead of its
so
time.
scary.
Yeah. And my grandfather had kind of a connection to his whole character in that role too. It just
Yeah,
He's a good guy.
Yeah, his character was based in Eastern Europe,
yeah.
and what's so great about the Black Cat and your grandfather's role is he's actually kind of a good guy.
He's
in
a
that
good
film.
guy.
He was a
Yeah,
good guy.
kind of a good
Except
guy.
at the end.
Yeah, except in the
That's okay.
yeah, with that.
That scene is so ghoulish.
Yeah, and he looks like he's painting a fence. But he's really doing something else.
Yeah. If you haven't seen it, you'll have to watch Black Cat again.
Yeah, the ending of Black Cat ends with vivisection.
Hey, before we go too much further, I do have to say of the other film of my grandfather's, I thought that was probably his greatest performance, maybe other than Wolfman, of Mice and Men, where he played Les.
I was actually going to mention that. Yeah, his role of Mice and Men was just fabulous, and just as strong as his performance in The Wolfman, I believe. Yeah, it was really great.
He called it his bread and butter.
It's a good one. What about you, Sarah? What's your favorite?
Targets.
Targets, yeah. Peter Bogdanovich. Yeah,
Targets is a film that unfortunately is as timely today as when it was made. It represented, it's really my father playing himself, an aging horror star film actor, but it also, it shows that the violence is not up on the screen, but it's on the streets. And it's a very appropriate film today,
Yeah,
as it was. It was made during the time of the assassination of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, and so it was pulled from the theaters then, but it's available on DVD or whatever the current is. I'm not techie, if you hadn't gathered that. And it's a really wonderful film, I think. It's made by Peter Bogdanovich.
Yeah.
And Peter wrote it, acted in it, directed it, and it was really a fine film.
It's great because it also shows your father in a colored film. He's instead of the usual, black and white films, you actually get to see your father in a colored film. It's great. It's one of the rare times.
Yeah.
When I think about my favorite Karloff role, I would instantly think, well, is Frankenstein's monster? But when I think about it more, I think, no, it's the Grinch.
Oh, yeah.
He's such a great. He was the voice of the Grinch, Dr. Seuss.
Oh, I know. We love the Grinch.
Yeah, it's just really great.
He won a Grammy for that. And there's a story that goes along with the Grinch Grammy. He was in England at the time, so his agent accepted the award for him. So the next time my father came back from England to Los Angeles to work, he went to his agent's office and he said, "Here, Boris, here's your Grammy." And my father took it and looked at it and said, "Looks like a bloody doorstop." And he took it from his agent and he went over and he put it on the floor of the door and he left it there in his agent's office.
And that's not the first time I've heard of Grammys being used as doorstops. And I'm not confessing anything, okay? It's not the first time I've heard Grammys being used that way. Okay, so it says Karloff Home Movies. So is this when we're supposed to run the Karloff movies? Yeah. Okay. Well, run film. Okay.
I've seen them. Oh, you're good. You didn't even have to be asked to go ooh and ah. Come on. That's when Boris tries to eat the baby. You're not oohing and awing. That's I was going to say that's on my cremation, but that's actually on my, what do you do? Yeah, that was my mother. That's my grandmother. And this is when my father's head was shaved for Tower of London. It was going back in. A little later, you'll see that my father, I was left with him while my mother went to play bridge, and my father thought it would be amusing to have my head shaved. You'll see that later. My mother didn't think it was so amusing. Oh yeah. This is just shown to prove that the movies and movie stars are just as boring as everybody else's.
Home movies are home movies.
You betcha. That Jimmy Gleason was a wonderful actor, and that's his grandson that I just poked in the face. I never really, even when I grew up, I didn't like it. Well, this is a friend of ours putting me in my father always drove convertibles. The flowers are bigger than the kid. I don't know where we're going. Maybe those are my cremation funds. But this is in New York where my father was in, I was a streetwalker. My father taught me to be a streetwalker. This is the only known color footage of my father in Frankenstein This is from Son of Frankenstein.
It's so amazing.
My father had a lovely sense of humor, but you can really see the makeup.
Wow.
It has a tint of green, which shows the genius of Jack Pierce, because he knew it would show up. A deathly gray. That's Jack Pierce. But he knew it would show up a deathly gray on black and white film. This is color, so you can see the green a bit. But today, all the film, all the toys and everything are green because of that. My father taught it. That's not the best shot of my father. He loved the outdoors. He was really very athletic. His favorite game was, he loved to play tennis. We had a tennis court. And he loved the British game of cricket. That was his passion. Here we go. There's the kid with the shaved head. I think my mother was taking me out to drown me. Because she really didn't like that shaved head. And this is at some Beverly Hills kid's birthday, probably mine. Doesn't everybody have an elephant at a birthday party? This is at my father's 50th birthday, I think. What does it say? I'm blind. 50th birthday, and all those symbols on this cake are cricket symbols. And that's the year before I was born. It's really out of sync. Don't ever give Boris Karloff a knife. This is your life, Boris Karloff.
Paul's on the same day as yours? I believe so, yes. Your daughter? Yes. Sara Jane. Well, here she is from Sausalito, California, where she's attending a months of business school.
Oh, yes. Clap again, please. This is my partner's story.
Oh, yes. Whenever possible, you've always spent your birthdays together. Oh, sit right down here. Right, Eddie? Haven't you, Sara Jane?
Yes, but not this year because Dad needs to be in the morning.
Sure. Well, that's why we want you to be here tonight, Sara Jane, so you and your dad can celebrate your birthdays right now. Happy birthday, how about that? Sara Jane, your daddy.
He was horrified. Not that I was there. He was horrified that they did This Is Your Life. Ralph had promised him he would never make him a subject. And my stepmother talked Ralph into doing it. He was absolutely horrified. You have now lived through my father's and my home movies. Thank you.
Excellent. You know, it's one thing to like watch home movies, but it's another thing to like watch home movies and have like a great commentary. It really gives you okay. Yeah. Okay. Nice. Yeah. Let's have the Victoria Goodnight join us. So
Hi.
We're gonna just move on. Are we gonna play okay?
Hi.
Play Victoria Price.
And I'm so sorry not to be there with you this weekend. I feel like we were invited to be part of the Mount Rushmore of horror, and not to be there is just breaking my heart. You know, the panel is called Monster Kids, the original Monster Kids, but honestly, none of us would be up there if it weren't for all of you guys, the real Monster Kids, who keep our father's legacies alive in your hearts. I've come to realize that what my dad taught me all those years ago is the only truth that there is, which is the only legacy any of us can leave on this planet, is the legacy of love. And that's the legacy all of our dads left to the horror community. And it's so meaningful to me that you guys have kept my dad's legacy alive in your hearts. Thank you from the bottom of mine. And I know that wherever my dad is, he is definitely aware that this is happening. I'm sure he and his dear friend Boris are having a good laugh together, and that all four of them wouldn't believe that their legacy has lasted this long, and it's all because all of you guys. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, and apparently Alex too, for keeping the legacy of Vincent Price so alive. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I really wish I could be there with you. Say bye.
That's so good. That's really good. Do any of you guys have any recollections of Vincent Price at all? Sarah? Okay, lay it on Sarah.
Sarah, Bela and Vincent and Boris were in a film together.
Yes, they were. And they misbehaved all the way through. Vincent was a wonderful man, and my father and he were very good friends. And I knew Vincent growing up, and as a semi-grown-up, I've never really grown up. But
I'm in that club.
But he was a lovely human being. He really was, and he was so gifted in so many ways, in the art world, in the cooking world, truly. And he was so gifted, and then of course as an actor, and as a human being. He was just a lovely man, and I was fortunate enough to know him.
He strikes me as someone he's someone who would be a lot of fun to be around, and just very entertaining from what I get from seeing him on screen and just reading about him. His persona just really projects a persona of like just being well read and very cultured, but still just like didn't seem like he took himself too seriously at all. And so, do you know anything about your grandfather's art collection?
We still have a lot of the paintings that are on that wall. Unfortunately, not the Clairvaux.
So you do not have the Clairvaux?
No.
Okay.
But that picture was very important to him. There's other pictures of my dad as a baby with, my grandmother and my grandfather put that portrait in the back, which I always thought was a little bit funny to have that. But he loved just interesting art, and he kept a lot of the same paintings with him his whole life, because that picture in the center is early on in New York, in his apartment in New York, and he kept them throughout his life.
And you still have that?
Some of them we do.
Yeah, that's great. I would like to see that painting sometime. Because it was done by the same person who did the full-size painting of your grandfather.
Oh, which one?
The full-size portrait painting that I have.
Is that Geza Kennedy?
You're surprised.
And Geza,
yeah, I think it's the same artist, I believe.
There was some rumors about that Clairvaux picture that she didn't actually pose for it, but that he painted it.
Oh.
I guess I haven't ever really followed the whole story about that.
Is there other pictures of your father and Clairvaux together that are private?
Not that I've seen. I know she sought him out in Los Angeles after one of this. They came from doing the Broadway stage play of Dracula to Los Angeles. I believe that's where she met him backstage for the first time.
Wow, she totally fell for the old Dracula thing. Why not? Okay. So these are shots from your grandfather's early stage stage career, right?
Well, the military is actually his military photograph. He was in the Hungarian infantry in World War I.
So he was actually in World War I?
Yes, he
Okay,
fought
so
on
I
the
didn't
Eastern
know that.
Front. You didn't know that?
No.
Yeah, he was actually on 3 separate occasions injured, shot in the shoulder, shot in the thigh, and then suffered a pretty serious concussion and an explosion a 3rd time before he finally, in Hungary, actors in the National Theater were exempt from going to war. They felt that they were part of the artistic community and that, but he volunteered, he was a patriot, and I think after 3 serious injuries, he might have reconsidered that choice, because in the theater, you worked your way up. It was like seniority. And when he left, he lost that seniority. So when he, after the war, came back and pretty much had to start over, with his career on the stage and fight his way back.
Wow. Yeah. So I've always been really intrigued by the skill of him as Jesus Christ.
Yeah. He played it, we believe, in 2 different productions of The Passion in Hungary, like 1914 and 1916.
So that wasn't filmed, it was a stage
play.
Okay.
And, we have a signed picture, a signed version of that dating into 1916. Yeah. And the bottom photograph is from here in the U.S., a stage play called Arabesque, which was pretty risque, but I love that picture because that's pre-Dracula. But look at those, I don't know if you can see it, look at those hands.
I know.
He had that, and the center picture is The Red Poppy, which is a play. And you just, when you talk about somebody being made to play the role of Dracula, he had that look, those eyes, those hands that just came completely natural to the role of Dracula.
Yeah, I mean, you can see the essence of the Dracula character in these photos.
Except maybe the one of Christ.
Yeah. Maybe. But it's amazing. It's just like it's like he was his life trajectory was heading towards that role.
Yeah, especially growing up near Transylvania and really with the folklore of vampires, a significant part of his early years.
Yeah, and actually having like that proximity to Transylvania. I mean, it's actually kind of spooky.
Yeah. So that picture with the cigar is one of our personal favorites, my dad's personal favorite of his dad. If you start looking through Google Images, you'll see a huge portion of his photos. He has a cigar in his hand. And that was something kind of, it's a little bit of trademark, but my grandmother didn't like the cigars. She had him smoke pipes in the house. But it was her job when they were doing summer stock and stage plays and parents to keep his cigar lit. So she would have to puff on it backstage so that when he came back off stage, his cigar was ready to go.
That's a rough job for someone who doesn't really want to do that. Smoker backstage.
Right. And that's my dad. That's my dad with his dad in the monster makeup from
Ghost Friends.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. I always thought that Bela Lugosi had brown eyes until about 5 years ago, I acquired a movie poster, one sheet poster of Dracula that had a portrait shot, and his eyes were blue.
Right.
And then I thought, oh my God, I just realized, then I started looking at all the black and white photos, and I thought, he had blue eyes.
Yeah.
What, do you have the same eyes as him?
I think his eyes were a little bit even bluer than mine, but they were definitely blue.
Yeah, and that must have been kind of striking, probably seeing him in his Dracula outfit, these striking blue eyes, I always pictured him as like deep black eyes, staring right through you, but it's even more striking, I think, if there are those, he had blue eyes.
Yeah. And I think too, and Sarah was mentioning Jack Pierce, I think my grandfather really didn't wear very much makeup for Dracula, but he did wear like a cape makeup that I believe Jack Pierce commissioned through Max Factor, a very, very light shade of green to also create that.
Make it more pale.
On screen. But I can imagine with the blue eyes staring at you. You know, there's that one famous photo of him from Mark of the Vampire, where you can really tell how light his eyes are in that picture, even though it's a black and white picture.
I've seen colored stills from that movie as well. It's really amazing because, you know, when I think about Dracula the movie, it's really not hard to imagine your father with fangs, but there's no fangs in that movie at all. And in fact, there's no fangs in any vampire movie until the 50s or something.
Yeah. I think they weren't allowed to show it. The only blood in the original 1931 film was when Renfield, you know, cuts his finger and Bela goes in for the...
That's right.
Yeah. But it's funny that you say that because my dad has always felt that in, you know, current portrayals of him or photographs, a lot of people want to Photoshop in fangs.
Yeah.
And he's kind of felt like, no, he didn't, that wasn't the original role. But we recently put out a graphic novel of Dracula with Legendary Comics. And it was the first time that we said, well, he's actually portraying the Dracula character from the Bram Stoker's book. So he does have fangs in that graphic novel. And it's kind of scary to see, actually.
I need to see that, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't need fangs.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah, you know what's coming in that film.
I mean, he's so convincing as a character. You know, he doesn't need anything else really. Oh, hey, here's our film.
Hey, somebody looks familiar there.
It's the gang. And yeah, there's your father.
Yeah.
And please give him my best. And I hope he's doing well.
Yeah. So there's a little family picture carrying on the legacy. Yeah. My husband, my sons, and daughter-in-law.
Yeah, that's a great picture of Bela and yourself, Sarah.
Sarah, that was when you and my dad did a talk at the university here. What was that? Laverne University.
Yeah. Okay, now, there's your special video. And we're supposed to say run video.
Hello, and welcome to Midsummer Scream. It's a real pleasure to again be with fans. It's amazing how 90 years after he created the character, it's still more popular than it ever was. Dad would have been amazed to see the outpouring of sentiments that people express. Oh, there's hardly a day goes by that someone doesn't recognize the name. And so it's a very proud thing for the family. Again, enjoy yourself at Midsummer Scream.
Moving right through. I have to say that White Zombie is probably my favorite role in Fathers. I mean, with a character with a name like Murder Legend Dawn, I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. And my love for that movie is well documented. I put it on the guitar.
Yeah.
I had to do it. Okay. All right. And here's your great grandfather.
Great grandfather.
Yeah. And
that's an early stage picture there up in the corner. Like I said, he was on stage for 11 years. A lot of people don't know of his stage background, but he probably made over 1,000 appearances all over the country from 1902 to 1913. He ended up in LA, but he was doing 2 nights or 2 shows a day. It was amazing. I've been researching his career, and I look at it now and I look back and I say, oh my God, you know, his film career almost pales his film career almost pales his stage career, because he had so many appearances, and they did it nightly. They were constantly traveling on a train from town to town, doing 1 night, 2 night stands on the train to the next town. And we're talking about Kansas in 1904, 1905. We're talking about Indian Territory, Oklahoma. They played Oklahoma all over. It was just amazing. North Dakota, South Dakota, Canada. You know, I see all these cities he played throughout the United States, and it just always reminds me that Johnny Cash song says, I've been everywhere, man, you know, because he really was.
So he was born into it, pretty much.
Well, I guess he was, because both his parents were deaf mute, so his first language was sign, and his mother became, through rheumatism, was bedridden for a couple of years. So he had to drop out of school in 5th grade and take care of his mom and his 2 younger siblings, where his older brother and his dad worked. Frank Chaney, his father was a barber for over 30 years, head chair. But his education in his first language was sign. And you see it throughout his movies. He does abbreviations of sign throughout, similar to Sarah in that you asked for it. He did a segment about Lon Chaney. I don't know if you've ever seen that one. And he goes into Dad's, first language was ABC, and he goes, and I'll show you, and he did some abbreviations. And I think a lot of people don't realize that about my grandfather, too. His grandparents were both deaf mutes, too. His father and him communicated a lot through signs, so you see that in a lot of, I think, where you get that pathos from my grandfather is because he had that understanding of what emotion is. And it wasn't, and I think his father said, it isn't how you really feel about the role, it's what you can make the audience bring you in and take you there. And that was the key. And that was his education. And his brother, actually, older brother, went on stage as a job. And then they hired him. He was just a property boy. And he said, you can imagine if you were to grow up with deaf parents, they were ridiculed quite often. His father was called Dummy. Everybody in Colorado Springs knew who he was because he was the head barber at the shop. And he would hang out at the barber shop, and he'd hear all the town gossip. And this was when the gold rush was going on. And he would hear it, and then he'd come home to his mother, and he'd reenact all the scenes for her. He'd dress up. He'd be a little newspaper that was going on. So I would have to say, yeah, really from the beginning. But once he saw the stage, he said he fell in love with it. There was no other thing. He tried other jobs, but he loved to be something different. He loved to make, a lot of people don't know because they get more scared by him, but he was really, his first thing was he was a comedian and a dancer, and people don't know that. And he was a phenomenal dancer. He choreographed. He was one of the most sought-after choreographers in California for many years. And he was incredible what he would do. Even they had one, the early script of Man of 1,000 Faces, there was a scene that cut out, and they shouldn't have, but they were talking about the mechanical man act, and the best I could describe it was Michael Jackson's moonwalk.
All right.
And he was very funny. He goes, I could always make people laugh. That wasn't ever a problem for me because I was used to it. And when he went into film, he did comedies in the beginning, and he goes, I went home, I was horrible, I was mortified. Everything that worked on stage didn't work in film. So I had to relearn everything all over. And also stage makeup is a lot different than film makeup, especially in that early years, because colors wouldn't, they would look different. They might have orange makeup on and it'll appear white, or even green. Sometimes it would appear white in those old films. So he just, as a child all the way through, and he loved it so. He really embraced the people, but he was a very private man by nature and very secretive about his makeup. So he did all of his makeups at home. We made them out first. Once he knew he had it down, how long it would take, he was always the first guy on set in the morning, first one to the studio so he could start his makeup to whatever role he was playing and then be ready, because he was very much one of those prompt kind of guys, and I'd have to say that was from his father, who wore a suit as a barber, and every day to work for 30 years, and I think he got that regiment from him. But he was quite a unique individual, and a lot of what he's done is emulated by a lot of the horror films today. I see variations of it throughout, and you know, he just loved what he was doing. I think, unfortunately, our batons have crossed a number of times, because when Lon died unexpectedly at 47, you know, he very well may have done that Dracula role. I think you see what he might have done with it in London After Midnight, but it wasn't to be. And then Dracula and Bela came along, and that's kind of sometimes destiny, how I look at it. And then, of course, Boris came along, and then when it came to the Wolfman, I think Boris turned it down. If I remember right, he was up for the Wolfman role, but I don't think he wanted to be typecast so much anymore in the horror genre. And of course, my grandfather was just starting off, and his father was a famous movie star, and you know, just kind of came his way, and it was his destiny, and it was his baby. He always called it his baby, and he loved that role. He said no one else could ever play it like me.
He excelled at that role. And when he played it, after he played it numerous times, you could just tell that he was just felt so comfortable in that role. You know. So listening to you talk about your grandfather's makeup procedure, I'm curious. Do you know if him and Jack Pierce ever rubbed shoulders? I mean, did those two ever come in contact?
Yes, they did.
They never
They both worked at Universal in the 19-teens.
Yeah.
And Jack was more of an actor in the beginning. You know, a lot of this, all the stage people that came off the stage going to film, they all know how to do their own makeup. I mean, they just kind of came with the territory. So, yeah, when Jack became, you know, the makeup artist there, of course, Lon did all of his own. So, you know, not only was he the actor, he created the character, and even in memos I saw from MGM, or even going back to the Phantom, they said, either we got a great role for a young ingenue, and we've got a great role for a leading man, but if we can't get Chaney, it can't be done. So I thought that was quite a compliment coming from the studio. And then his wife Hazel at that time said, it was up in the air. They just left it totally up to him to create the Phantom of the Opera. And of course that was on the heels of Hunchback of Notre Dame. So Graham said on Hunchback, he was really scared because he wanted to become the Hunchback and have the audience feel the Hunchback. And he said he was a little scared, nervous about that one. And then after it was highly successful, I think it was Universal's first $1 million film. And then they did the follow-up to Phantom. Graham said, Dad came home one day and he was so chock full of his he goes, this is it, this is the role. And he knew it. He goes, I know it, and I'm gonna work my ass off to be the Phantom. And he said, and he went and he browbeat the dentist to create the teeth, and you know, he always had a say in everything that he did. He'd just hire you know, people. If he didn't do it himself, then he would hire an expert to do it, like the first fake eye that was ever used in a film. That contact lens was probably about that big around and that thick, and he had to get that into his eye. And of course they were, you know, but he suffered for his art. He was willing to do it. Unfortunately, it probably wasn't real good for his health, but he loved his art, and it was all about entertaining people. He strapped his knees straight up to his back. I don't know if you've ever tried it. That's not like something you normally do. Ouch. I guess I had to try it just to see, but when you do that, you pitch forward. Mm-hmm. So he had to have the leather harness. He got a leather maker, and he worked out the harness for it. And you can see on the stumps, they're a little bit tilted, so you kind of keep him back. And then he uses the crutches to do the rest of it and keep his balance. But if you see that, he was a very powerful man. He pulls himself up with his legs bound up his rope to the upper floor, and it's all on. I mean, he wouldn't have double. So
yeah, in that movie, he had his legs are chopped off below the knees.
So people did think that he was actually crippled, that he didn't have legs. So I think at the end of that movie, they did a little trailer on it. It shows Lon going up and down the stairs. He does a little dance coming up and down. It's pretty cool. Like, yeah, I can walk. This is, and then of course he does the next one, or one of the ones after where he had no arms. You know, he had his arms cut out, which is a crazy story, but it was pretty impressive. And I think it was Burt Lancaster that said it was the most emotional scene he's ever seen in his entire life.
Wow.
From an actor to go from one spectrum of being happy and going all the way to the other side in one scene. And if you've ever had that opportunity to see The Unknown, that's what it's called, he's amazing in it.
Yeah. The Unknown. Yeah. What about your grandfather?
My grandfather, I think, of Mice and Men, I really like, I don't know, of Mice and Men, but he did, when he first started, you know, he was doing everything. He was trying to make it on his own. His real birth name was Creighton Chaney, like my son sitting right over there. He's named after his great-grandfather, but he changed it to Lon Jr. The studios kind of forced him to do that. They just felt it would be more marquee. His father was such a huge star.
Yeah, sure.
He kept going, but he did a series called The Last Frontier. It was a serial, Western serial, and he played 2 characters in it. And it's just a lot of fun. I mean, a lot of action. He had to do stunts, and I was telling somebody on the show, they said, okay, you have to be the stunt man, because they all used to do a lot of their own stunts. And they go, so the horse is going to come running by, and you're going to be in the tree. And when it gets right underneath, you drop down on it and ride it off, you know. And he got so beat up so many times, but he got right back up and did it again. But that one was fun. I love, of course, the Wolfman. All the Universal, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, and that was a special time, I think, in Hollywood for the horror genre.
Yes.
It just expanded, and I don't know, it was a real people accepted it that way, but I think it took off so much that people were intrigued by changing characters and these monsters that it just captured the imagination of generations continuing on.
So he played the Wolfman 4 times?
5.
5 times. So it was the Wolfman and Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, House of Dracula, House of Frankenstein, and Abbott and Costello meet the Wolfman, or Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. So in my opinion, his best portrayal of the Wolfman is in Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. He seems like just that much more vicious and just like out for blood, and much more Wolfman-like than he ever had been.
Yeah, that's also one of my favorite. I remember a friend of ours, their son, he started watching horror, and he was having nightmares. And because unfortunately I gave him like Wolfman a couple of the videos to watch, and he was really freaking out. And his mom came to me, she said, oh, he's like having nightmares and stuff. I said, all right, we'll give him that. So I pulled out Abbott and Costello and said, watch this.
Yeah.
He was fine after that because he saw the humor in it, you know, so that was a great story. Definitely one of my highlights.
It's almost like that movie is an antidote to all the other movies. If you're scared from like, you know, the classic Universal monster movies, watch Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein, and it kind of mellows everything out.
And I think it's funny that both Lon Chaney Jr. and Bela Lugosi played it kind of straight, like they're playing their characters, and then with the comedy going on all around them.
Yeah, they had a lot of fun, a lot of respect for one another. People think, well, sometimes do they get along? You know, all I've ever read about is what respect he had for Boris and your father, and Jack Pierce too. You know, people don't know. They didn't get along as they see him holding a fist like that while he's burning him, basically, you know, when he was singeing the hair at the end. And, you know, he had to sit there, similar to what Sarah was saying. The very first time that he went into makeup, it was a 22-hour process.
Wow, 22 hours.
22 hours. And the reason being is because at that time they could only shoot a little bit of footage. And then they had to go process it. It wasn't like digital, not even look at it. I mean, they had to go process it, look at it, shoot it again a little bit more, look at it, and they did this for hours and hours. Besides, I think the first time he said it took about 6.5 hours to put the makeup on. And then it was similar to Sarah, it was about 2.5 hours. He goes, it was bad enough to have to sit still and just felt like every fiber of your body was just itching. You couldn't scratch it. You're just going crazy and having to hold still. And, you know, I've got some photos where they actually had him in the chair, and they had his fingers pinned down so they would have the exact same placement so they could process each scene to show the transformation. And then thereafter it was about 4 hours. You know, Jack got better and better, and they had, you know, the nose piece, so it took probably about 4 hours. He said about 2 hours. He said, but that was the worst taking it off, because they used acetone in those days, and he said he was so red and raw by the time it was over, but he was a trooper like his father, you know. He's moving forward.
Wow. Okay, so I just got the signal. We're supposed to wrap things up, but I just want to ask one more question. What does Halloween mean for you guys? What did it mean? What does it mean now? I just need to ask this question.
I don't like scary movies. So I turn out the lights out front on Halloween. And hope nobody raises my door.
Understood. I have a confession. I only watch horror movies in the daytime.
You're as bad as I am.
Yeah. My imagination gets the most of me sometimes.
Well, you know, now we joke that Halloween's our busy season because, you know, not only do we, you know, we read about and hear about Bela Lugosi all year long, but especially at Halloween, he's almost all of the famous monsters are really...
Yeah, they come to the fore. They arise from their graves.
Exactly, yeah. But growing up, you know, we really didn't talk about my grandfather and Halloween, and people always asked me if he'd ever dressed up on Halloween, you know, in his costume. And my dad had no recollection, but somebody recently wrote an article about living in Toluca Lake, where my dad, you know, grew up as a child, and said they used to trick or treat, and my grandfather one year opened the door in his full costume.
Wow.
So I don't know if that's true, but he remembers it that way, and that my grandmother invited them in and gave them red Kool-Aid.
What a lucky bunch of kids.
Yeah.
Well, for me, Halloween's my favorite holiday, no doubt about it.
Me too.
I loved to dress up when I was a kid. I loved the candy. We used to get pillowcases and go all night long. I wish kids could do that nowadays, but you can't. We go home and drop the bag, get another one, and go out, and people would be kicking us out by then. Hey, weren't you here earlier? You know, we live in a big area, but we loved it, and it is our season now, no doubt about it. And at Halloween, I love scaring kids. I just love it.
Me too.
I have a really good time. I even wrote my son in to help me a few times. Had little wires, I had skeletons, and you know, and I pulled the string. I mean, I got it. There was a lot of kids come back later when they're all grown. Like, oh, we love Halloween because we used to come to your house every year. You'd be doing something different, and then I'd have other kids come up and say, we hate Halloween because of you.
Well, I have to tell you that my dad, you saw him, was a pretty reserved guy, but he thought it was so funny when we were trick-or-treating as kids. We'd all trick-or-treat together, my cousins and I, and he would put on the Dracula cape and a scary mask, like of an old man, you know, scary face. And where we trick-or-treated, there was hedges between each house. He would hide behind a hedge, but we didn't know which one. So we would huddle together and walk down the street, just scared the whole time, wondering which one he was going to jump out behind. He thought it was hilarious. We saved that mask because it's like burned into my memory.
Wow, that's great.
Well, I do have one of my grandpa, because he lived in Capistrano there as he was older, and I've heard this, and I actually was just in touch with somebody, sent me an email, and they said, because I knew he used to scare the kids. You know, they come up and get Halloween, and they'd always ask him to howl. So he would oblige the kids, and of course he had throat cancer, so you know it was harder for him. And he'd howl, and they said he would howl, and he'd do it all night long. By the end of the night, he'd he was done.
That was pretty nice of him to do that, though. I mean, I traveled just to hear your grandfather howl, for sure. Well, thank you guys. It's been really, really great seeing you guys.
Thank you, Kirk.
Thank you, everyone. And yeah, hope we can do this again next year. All right.
At this time, please gather your belongings and exit the theater so we may prepare for our next presentation. Thank you for your cooperation. Enjoy the rest of your experience here at Midsummer Screen.